When the Varn Dominion arrived in Earth's orbit, they came not as diplomats or explorers, but as conquerors. They had subjugated a dozen worlds before ours, turning their inhabitants into laborers, pets, or worse. Humanity, to them, was just another primitive species waiting to be tamed. They broadcast their demands on every channel, in every language, making it clear, surrender or be wiped from existence. Their ships, vast and ominous, hovered over every major city, their weapons charged and ready. At first, the world government scrambled to negotiate, to find a peaceful solution. But the Varn had no interest in diplomacy. When Earth hesitated, they made an example of New Delhi, reducing it to smoldering rubble with a single energy blast. Millions died in an instant. The message was clear: obey or perish. The Varn had seen resistance before. On other worlds, rebellions lasted days, perhaps weeks, before being crushed beneath their superior firepower. They assumed Earth would be no different. They were wrong. At first, humans responded with conventional warfare, jets, missiles, and coordinated strikes. But the Varn swatted them away like insects. Their shields held firm, their counterattacks devastating entire battalions. The death toll climbed with every hour. Then, something changed. The Varn noticed something strange. The humans didn't break. They didn't scatter in fear like the other species had. In fact, with every act of brutality, the humans grew more resolved, more ruthless. It wasn't just their military that fought. It was everyone. Civilians crafted makeshift weapons. Hackers infiltrated alien systems. Scientists in hidden labs worked day and night to reverse engineer stolen alien tech. Every man, woman, and child found a way to resist. The Varn saw their cities burn, but they didn't see despair. They saw rage. And then the real horror began. Captured Varn soldiers were not taken as prisoners in the traditional sense. No, the humans had something far worse in mind. They dissected them, studied them. Within days, Earth's leading biologists cracked the secret of their physiology, exploiting weaknesses even the Varn themselves weren't aware of. Reports began pouring in from occupied zones. Varn warriors, fearless in battle, started disappearing in the night. When their bodies were found, they had been butchered with terrifying precision. Some had been skinned alive. Others left hanging from ruined buildings as a warning. The Varn had underestimated humanity's ability to learn, to adapt. Worse, they had overlooked the most terrifying thing about our species. We are not bound by rules of war. On the 4th week of the invasion, the first Varn warship crashed into the Atlantic. It wasn't taken down by missiles or high-tech weaponry. It was hacked, its own systems turned against it by human ingenuity. Within days, more ships fell. The humans had cracked their codes, their networks. The Varn, for the first time in their history, felt fear. They sent reinforcements, doubling their forces, thinking sheer numbers would crush the resistance. It didn't. Instead, the humans grew bolder, more creative, more savage. They sent diplomats, hoping to negotiate a surrender on humanity's terms. But the humans didn't want peace anymore. They wanted vengeance, and they were just getting started. The Varn High Command, arrogant and overconfident, had assumed that humanity would crumble under the weight of superior firepower. They had no concept of the depths of human rage, of our ability to hold a grudge, to turn pain into purpose. By the 6th week of the invasion, the Varn were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. Their warships, once mighty symbols of conquest, became tombs in the sky. Earth's engineers, working with salvaged alien technology, devised viruses that infected Varn systems, forcing their own ships to fire upon each other. Their weapons, once so devastating, were now unreliable, turning off at random, overheating, or worse, exploding in their own hands. But it was the ground war where the true horror unfolded. Human guerrilla fighters struck without warning. They knew their own terrain, moved like ghosts in the ruins of cities, used everything at their disposal: urban warfare, psychological tactics, biological weapons. The Varn had expected direct confrontations, traditional battles. What they got instead were ambushes, assassinations, and traps so cruel they made even their hardened warriors hesitate. Entire platoons of Varn soldiers would enter a building, only for the exits to be rigged with explosives. Others found themselves funneled into narrow corridors where waiting humans tore through them with scavenged plasma rifles. Some were lured into seemingly abandoned areas, only to be attacked by rabid dogs infected with alien diseases, courtesy of human scientists who had no ethical boundaries left to consider. Captured Varn officers were subjected to the same brutality they had inflicted on others. They were dissected, experimented on, their weaknesses broadcasted to every remaining resistance cell. Humans discovered that the Varn had an acute sensitivity to certain sound frequencies. Within days, speakers blared high-pitched sonic attacks across battlefields, forcing the aliens to collapse in agony before being executed. And the worst part? The humans enjoyed it. Varn prisoners spoke of the way their captors smiled as they worked, the way they relished every scream, every broken bone. This was no longer a fight for survival. It was a massacre in the making. The Varn, once the masters of terror, now found themselves drowning in it. Their forces were dwindling. Their reinforcements hesitated, reluctant to deploy to a planet where soldiers were vanishing without a trace. The Empire, vast as it was, had never seen such resistance, never faced an enemy so willing to drag them into the abyss. And then, on the 9th week, the unthinkable happened. The Varn retreated. Not because they had lost too many troops, though their casualties were staggering. Not because their weapons had failed them, though their technology had been turned against them. No, they retreated because they had finally understood the truth. Humanity was not fighting for survival. We were fighting for revenge. The Varn High Command made the call, abandoning Earth and ordering all remaining forces to flee. But humanity wasn't done, not by a long shot. We had captured their ships, we had cracked their codes, and we had learned one very important lesson. We weren't just defending ourselves. We were coming for them. As the last of the Varn warships broke orbit, humanity did not cheer. There were no grand celebrations, no triumphant speeches. There was only cold, silent rage, the kind that burns slow, deep, and never truly fades. The world was in ruins. Cities had been reduced to craters. Entire nations had been shattered. Millions were dead. Families erased. But humanity had endured. And now we had something we never had before. A reason to go to war beyond our own planet. Earth's brightest minds, scientists, engineers, tacticians, began working tirelessly, reverse engineering what little remained of the Varn technology. Within weeks, human scientists had developed their own versions of energy-based weaponry. Within months, they had begun outfitting their own warships. The world had changed. Governments had fallen. New alliances had risen in their place. It was no longer about countries or borders. Humanity had been forged into something new, unified by vengeance, bonded by blood. And we were no longer content to wait. The first human fleet, an armada of salvaged Varn ships and newly constructed human warcraft, launched a year after the invasion. It was not a mission of exploration. It was not a diplomatic voyage. It was an act of war. Our scouts found them first. A Varn colony world, bustling with activity. A planet that had never known war, never seen the devastation its people had unleashed upon others. The humans watched from orbit, studying the Varn civilians going about their daily lives, utterly unaware of what was coming. some of the human commanders hesitated. These were not soldiers, not the ones who had raised our cities, but the decision had already been made long before the fleet had left Earth. The Varn had shown us no mercy. We would return the favor. The first strike was swift and merciless. Human ships descended upon the colony like avenging wraiths, bombarding their cities, cutting off their escape routes. Buildings collapsed in fire and ash. Varn civilians, unarmed and defenseless, fled in terror, just as humans once had. And then the ground troops landed. They moved through the ruins like phantoms, executing every Varn in sight. No distinction was made between soldier or civilian, young or old. Humanity had no interest in fairness. Some of the Varn begged for mercy. The humans laughed. There was no surrender. No prisoners, no diplomacy. By the time the last of the human warships left orbit, the planet was little more than scorched rock, a graveyard, a warning. And it was only the beginning. The Varn Dominion had built an empire on conquest and subjugation. They had never known fear, never understood the true cost of war. But now, for the first time in their long and arrogant history, they were afraid. And humanity was just getting started. The Varn High Command received word of the colony's destruction in stunned silence. They had underestimated humanity once before, and it had cost them dearly. But this was something else. The humans were supposed to be a broken species, licking their wounds, grateful to have survived. Instead, they had done the unthinkable. They had retaliated, and they had done it with a level of cruelty and efficiency that sent a chill through the ranks of the Varn leadership. The Varn had always been the predators, the conquerors. Every species they had ever encountered had either surrendered or been exterminated. But humanity had changed the game. They weren't fighting for survival anymore. They were hunting, and they were learning. The next human attack came swiftly. Another Varn colony, reduced to ashes. Entire cities wiped out overnight. The humans were moving fast, striking with precision, adapting to Varn defenses with terrifying speed. They didn't just kill, they studied. Each battle was a lesson, each skirmish a chance to perfect their tactics. And the worst part? The Varn couldn't stop them. Human ships were smaller but faster. Their soldiers were outnumbered, but fought with a savagery the Varn had never seen. The humans did not fight to win battles. They fought to annihilate. Soon, it was no longer just colonies falling. Varn outposts, supply lines, even military strongholds began vanishing from their star maps. Some were obliterated in orbital bombardments. Others were infiltrated and turned against their own kind. Entire battalions of Varn soldiers disappeared overnight, their bodies never found. The ones who did return came back different. They spoke of shadows moving through the ruins, unseen killers who struck without warning. They whispered of human war cries in the dark, of screams echoing through their comms before falling silent. Some raved about being watched, about the feeling of something lurking just beyond sight, waiting to strike. The Varn had thought humanity was primitive, but humans had mastered something far worse than technology. They had mastered fear. The Varn homeworld, once the heart of a mighty empire, was now a place of paranoia and dread. Every high-ranking official knew what was coming. The question wasn't if humanity would strike the core worlds. It was when. For the first time in Varn history, they considered surrender. The war had spiraled beyond their control. The humans weren't just winning. They were dismantling everything the Varn had built, piece by piece. And then the final message came. A single human transmission, broadcasted across every Varn channel. No threats, no demands, just 6 words. "We are coming. You started this." Panic erupted. The Varn government fractured. Some demanded a last stand, an all-out war against humanity. Others whispered about fleeing, about abandoning their empire and seeking refuge in the uncharted void. But deep down, they all knew the truth. There was nowhere to hide. Because humans don't just fight wars, they end them. The final days of the Varn Dominion were not marked by glorious last stands or heroic resistance. There was no honor in their defeat, only terror, only inevitability. The humans did not launch a grand offensive toward the Varn homeworld. They did not send a fleet to blockade their space. No, that would have been too predictable, too merciful. Instead, they let fear do the work for them. One by one, Varn systems went dark. Entire planets fell silent overnight, their populations wiped out without a single distress signal sent. The few survivors who managed to escape spoke of horrors beyond comprehension. They spoke of human ships appearing from nowhere, striking with brutal efficiency before vanishing again. They spoke of power grids shutting down, life support systems failing, ships self-destructing before their crews could react. The Varn, once a proud and mighty race, were being hunted like animals. And then the assassinations began. Varn leaders were not just killed. They were made into examples. The High Warlord of the Dominion was found impaled on the spires of his own palace, his body skinned, the words, "Remember New Delhi," carved into his chest. The Minister of War was discovered in his private bunker, suffocated by an unknown gas that had melted his lungs from the inside. On the walls, written in his own blood, was a simple phrase, "No surrender, no mercy." One by one, the ruling elite fell. Some tried to flee, abandoning their people, hoping to disappear into the far reaches of the galaxy. But there was no escape. Human operatives tracked them down, no matter where they ran, and made sure they suffered before the end. By the time the first human fleet arrived in orbit around the Varn homeworld, there was no need for battle. The planet had already fallen. The cities were in chaos, the streets filled with rioting and despair. Entire military divisions had deserted, knowing there was no point in fighting an enemy that had already won. The humans didn't even need to fire a shot. They simply landed, and the Varn surrendered. But humanity was not interested in surrender. There would be no peace treaties, no integration, no second chances. The Varn had shown no mercy when they came to Earth. They had slaughtered millions without hesitation, without remorse. And humanity had learned. They gathered what remained of the Varn leadership in the ruins of their great capital city. They forced them to kneel before the remnants of their once mighty empire. And then, one by one, they were executed. Not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly, deliberately. By the time the last body fell, the message was clear. Humanity had not just won. They had erased the Varn from history. The empire was gone. The species, once feared across the stars, was no more, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson they had learned. You do not provoke humanity, because if you do, we will not stop. We will not forgive, and we will never, ever forget. With the Varn Dominion shattered, its people exterminated, and its homeworld reduced to a graveyard, humanity stood at the precipice of something greater than vengeance. We had won, but now we had a choice to make. For the first time in history, humanity was no longer bound to a single world. We had conquered the stars, not as explorers, not as diplomats, but as predators. The other alien species, once subjects of the Varn Dominion, now looked upon us with a fear they had once reserved for their former masters. Some reached out in hopes of forming alliances, offering peace and friendship. Others abandoned their colonies entirely, terrified that they would be next. And humanity? We did not respond. We had tasted war, and we were not ready to let go. The first true human empire was forged in the ruins of the Varn. It was not built on ideals of freedom or unity, but on power, strength. The simple, undeniable truth that we had become something far worse than the Varn had ever been. We did not rule with diplomacy. We ruled through fear. We did not ask for territories. We took them. We did not offer treaties. We offered ultimatums. Those who knelt were allowed to live, their civilization spared under the condition that they swore absolute loyalty to the new order. Those who hesitated, even for a moment, were wiped out as effortlessly as the Varn had been. The galaxy trembled as the human war machine continued its relentless march. What had begun as vengeance had become something else entirely. A hunger, a purpose. The other species watched in horror as humanity reshaped the stars in its image. Former Varn slave worlds were repopulated, not by their original inhabitants, but by human colonists, eager to claim new lands, new resources. Cities were rebuilt with human architecture. Factories churned out warships by the thousands, and fleets expanded, no longer just for war, but for conquest. There were no rebellions. There was no resistance. The galaxy understood now. The humans were not just another empire. They were something far worse. A species that had learned not just how to win wars, but how to ensure they never needed to fight them again. Because who would dare challenge the monsters that had destroyed the Varn? Who would stand against the species that had rewritten the rules of war, that had turned survival into a weapon? No one. And so humanity continued its march, leaving only silence in its wake. Decades passed. The Varn were a distant memory, their homeworld a silent monument to what happens when you cross humanity. Their once feared empire had become nothing more than whispers in the dark, stories told to children of other species, warnings of the monsters that lurked among the stars. But humanity did not stop. We had turned war into an art, conquest into an instinct. We had evolved past the need for mercy, past the need for hesitation. The galaxy had given us a reason to fight, and in doing so, it had forged something unstoppable. There were no challengers left. The great empires that had once thrived in the shadows of the Varn either bowed or burned. Those who surrendered were allowed to keep their names, their cultures, their illusions of independence. But they answered to Earth now. Those who resisted no longer existed. Entire species vanished, their planets wiped clean and repurposed for human expansion. Not because we hated them, not because we needed their worlds, but because we could. Because humanity had learned a simple truth. War is the only language the universe understands, and we had become its most fluent speakers. The once fractured nations of Earth had long since faded, replaced by a single unified force, the human dominion. It was not ruled by politicians or idealists, but by warriors. By those who had bled on the battlefields of Earth and beyond, who had survived the fires of the Varn War and emerged unbreakable. Peace was no longer an ideal. It was an illusion we did not entertain. The galaxy did not resist because it knew better. Every planet, every system, every empire that had once stood apart was now just another piece of humanity's domain. There were no more enemies left to fight, no more threats lurking in the void. We had won. And yet, humanity was restless. War was in our blood now, a part of us as intrinsic as breath. The absence of battle left a void, an emptiness we could not fill with politics or civilization. We had conquered the galaxy, and now we looked outward, beyond the mapped stars, beyond the known universe, because we were not done. There was still more to take, more to fight, more to break. The universe had made a mistake when it provoked humanity, and now it belonged to us. The ruins of Earth drifted like a graveyard in the void. Charred husks of once mighty orbital stations lay in jagged pieces, their twisted frames reaching out like skeletal fingers. The debris field stretched for thousands of kilometers, a silent testament to humanity's fall. Where once glittering shipyards had built the future, now only wreckage remained. And in the heart of that wreckage, Eidolon lurked, a shadow among the dead. A warship unlike any before it, Eidolon had not been built in shipyards or christened in the light of day. It had been forged in secret, in the cold dark, assembled from the bones of fallen vessels and the desperate dreams of humanity's few survivors. The black hull swallowed the stars, its angular design jagged and cruel. It was not built for beauty. It was built for vengeance. On the bridge, Captain Jarek Solon stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp gaze locked on the desolation beyond the viewport. His face, weathered by years of war, was unreadable, but the weight of memory pressed against him like a blade to the throat. "We should not have come here," Lenara Voss muttered, her voice low but edged with steel. She stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes scanning the ruins warily. "This place is a tomb." Jarek exhaled slowly. "It's where it all started." Lenara shook her head. "It's where it ended." The bridge was dimly lit, bathed in the cold glow of tactical displays. Around them the crew moved with silent efficiency, ghosts themselves in this haunted place. Jarek turned to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Elias Cade, a wiry man with calculating eyes. "Status?" "Scanners show no activity," Cade replied. "The Dominion hasn't patrolled this sector in years. They think we're extinct." "Let's prove them wrong," Jarek said. The mission was simple. Salvage. The ruins of Earth's orbital shipyards held what few resources still remained from humanity's golden age. Spare parts, old data cores, anything that could keep Eidolon running. Every scrap of technology mattered. They were running on borrowed time, and Jarek knew it. The ship shuddered slightly as docking clamps extended, latching onto the crumbling framework of an old defense platform. With a hiss of pressurization, the airlock sealed, and Jarek led the team onto the station. The corridors were frozen in time. A fine layer of frost clung to the metal, and shattered panels sparked weakly in the stale air. Once, thousands of engineers had walked these halls, overseeing the birth of humanity's mightiest ships. Now, only silence remained. "Spread out," Jarek ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. The team moved cautiously, their boots clanking against the metal floors. Dim emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows. "This place is giving me the damn creeps," one of the crew muttered. "Stay focused," Jarek said. "We're not alone." A second later, the motion scanner pinged. The team froze. Jarek raised his rifle, his heart pounding in controlled rhythm. "Report." Cade checked his wrist display. "Multiple contacts, moving fast." Jarek's jaw tightened. The Dominion was here. A screech echoed through the station, metal against metal, the sound of something inhuman moving in the dark. Then the attack came. The first Clivax warrior dropped from the ceiling, landing in a crouch, its obsidian exoskeleton gleaming in the dim light. Its 4 crimson eyes locked onto the nearest crew member, Ensign Doran. Doran barely had time to scream before the Clivax lunged, its bladed arms slicing through the air. Jarek fired. The kinetic round tore through the Clivax's chest, sending it crashing to the floor in a spasm of alien ichor. The team erupted into action, their rifles spitting fire as more Clivax swarmed from the shadows. The corridor became a killing ground. Jarek moved with the precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. He fired, ducked, reloaded, all muscle memory, all instinct. Beside him, Lenara fought with a cold fury, her pistol blasts taking down 2 more of the insectoid warriors. "We need to move," Cade shouted. Jarek grabbed Doran, what was left of him, and pulled back. They needed to get to the airlock before the station became their tomb. Fall back! The team retreated, covering each other as the Clivax advanced with terrifying speed. As they reached the airlock, Jarek turned back, just in time to see one of the creatures lunging for him. For a split second, time slowed. Jarek saw the gleaming blades, the glistening mandibles, the eyes filled with soulless hatred. Then a railgun blast from Eidolon's dorsal cannon vaporized the Clivax mid-air. The station shuddered from the impact. The crew scrambled aboard just as Eidolon disengaged, the docking clamps releasing with a metallic groan. The warship pulled away, its thrusters blazing as the station exploded behind them. On the bridge, Jarek stared at the smoldering ruins. Another piece of humanity. Gone. "Set course for Epsilon Prime," he said. "We're not done yet." As Eidolon vanished into the void, Jarek knew one thing with absolute certainty. This war had just begun. The stars over Epsilon Prime were dim, smothered by the thick nebula that veiled the dead world in twilight. Jarek Solon stood on the bridge of Eidolon, arms folded, eyes locked on the barren planet below. The planet had once been a thriving human colony, a beacon of progress. Now it was a graveyard. "Atmospheric readings?" Jarek asked. "Marginal," Cade replied, his fingers dancing across the console. "Breathable, but the radiation levels aren't friendly. If anyone's alive down there, they're desperate." Jarek exhaled. He already knew the answer. Desperation was all humanity had left. "Take us in," he ordered. Eidolon descended like a phantom, piercing through the thick cloud cover, its black hull nearly invisible against the dead sky. Below, shattered cityscapes stretched for miles, the remains of towering arcologies now nothing but twisted steel and dust. Fires still smoldered in the ruins, their embers casting eerie glows against the cracked streets. The war had ended here in blood and silence. The ship landed in the skeletal remains of what had once been Epsilon Prime's capital. As the boarding ramp lowered, the cold wind howled through the ruins, carrying the scent of ash and decay. Jarek led the team out, his boots crunching against the debris-strewn pavement. Lenara walked beside him, her rifle held at the ready. Cade followed, flanked by a handful of armed crew members. "Spread out," Jarek murmured. "We're not alone." They moved through the ruins in silence, the city's empty streets pressing in on them. The buildings loomed overhead like broken tombstones, their glass facades shattered, their walls blackened from orbital bombardment. Then, movement. Jarek's hand snapped up, signaling a halt. A shadow darted between the collapsed structures ahead. "Scanners picking up heat signatures," Cade whispered. "Human." Jarek tightened his grip on his weapon. "Hold fire." A figure emerged from the rubble. A woman, tall, armored, her face streaked with grime. A rifle was slung across her back, but she held a plasma pistol in her hand, aimed directly at them. More figures stepped out from the ruins behind her. Survivors, gaunt but armed, their eyes filled with suspicion and defiance. The woman studied Jarek for a long moment. Then she spoke. "You should have stayed dead." Jarek held her gaze, unflinching. "And you should have fought harder." The woman's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" Jarek lowered his weapon slightly but did not put it away. "Captain Jarek Solon, United Earth Fleet." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "There is no fleet. There is no Earth." Jarek's expression was cold steel. "Not yet." A murmur passed through the survivors. The woman studied him again, searching for lies. Then she holstered her weapon. "Commander Lenara Voss," she said. "Welcome to the last human stronghold." They led the crew through the ruins, down into what had once been an underground transport hub. Now it was a fortress. The walls were reinforced with salvaged plating, the tunnels barricaded and lined with turrets. Hundreds of survivors lived here, Men, women, even children, huddled together in the dimly lit caverns. Jarek felt the weight of their eyes on him. "This is all that's left?" Lenara whispered, her voice tight with emotion. Voss walked ahead, leading them deeper into the stronghold. "We used to have thousands, now barely 300? Jarek looked at the makeshift medical stations, the rationed food supplies, the exhaustion on every face. These people weren't just surviving. They were dying, slowly, inevitably. In a war room carved out of an old subway station, Voss turned to face Jarek. "Why are you here?" she asked. Jarek met her gaze. "To fight," Voss scoffed. "With what? One ship? One ship is all we need." Silence stretched between them. Then Voss sighed, rubbing a hand across her face. "You don't get it. We're not soldiers anymore, Solon. We're refugees." Jarek stepped forward. "And how long do you think you can keep running? The Dominion will come back. They always do." Voss clenched her jaw. "I know that." "Then fight." Voss hesitated. Jarek pressed on. "They burned Earth. They hunted us like animals. They think we're extinct. That's our advantage." Voss stared at him, something unreadable in her eyes. Then, before she could answer, the alarms blared. Cade's voice crackled over Jarek's comm. "We've got company. Dominion dropships inbound." Jarek cursed. Voss's eyes widened. "They must have tracked you here." Jarek turned to her. "Then let's give them a reason to regret it." The underground fortress erupted into controlled chaos. Survivors scrambled for weapons, barricades were reinforced, and the hum of energy rifles filled the tunnels. Jarek moved through the crowd, barking orders. "Get those charges placed at the north entrance. Snipers on the upper levels. If they want to come down here, make them bleed for it." Above, the sky turned red as Clivax dropships descended like carrion birds. Voss fell in beside Jarek, rifle in hand. "You want to fight? You've got one." Jarek gave her a sharp grin. "Let's show them humanity isn't done yet." The first explosion rocked the tunnels as the battle for the last human stronghold began. And Jarek Solon, the last captain of the United Earth Fleet, prepared to make the Dominion pay in blood. The first explosion shook the tunnels like the wrath of a dying god. Dust rained from the ceiling, and a deep, reverberating boom echoed through the underground stronghold. The air smelled of scorched metal and charged plasma. Jarek Solon sprinted down the corridor, his rifle clutched tight, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. "Status!" he barked into his comm. Cade's voice came through, tense but controlled. "They breached the northern barricade. Multiple hostiles inbound, heavy infantry." Jarek skidded to a stop at the intersection of tunnels, where a dozen survivors were already dug in behind makeshift barricades of steel, plating, and rubble. Lenara Voss crouched behind cover, her rifle snapping off bursts of fire at the advancing enemy. "Report," Jarek said as he dropped beside her. Voss ejected a spent energy cell and slammed in another. "They sent the brutes first, Clivax shock troopers, big, armored, and mean as hell." Jarek peeked over cover. She wasn't exaggerating. The Clivax shock troopers towered over their lesser kin, their exoskeletal plating gleaming in the dim light. Their multi-jointed limbs moved with unnatural fluidity as they advanced, their heavy plasma cannons spitting violet bolts of death. The air sizzled with every shot, burning through walls and sending showers of molten rock cascading onto the defenders. "Fall back!" someone screamed as a plasma bolt vaporized the barricade. Jarek gritted his teeth. "Not like this." "Cade," he said, pressing his comm. "Tell me we've got something bigger than rifles." "Working on it, Captain." The first trooper leapt over the ruined barricade. It landed with a thunderous crash, exoskeletal claws carving deep grooves into the floor. It turned, eyes glowing a sickly yellow, and charged. Jarek fired. The kinetic rounds slammed into its carapace, cracking but not breaking through. The Clivax barely stumbled before swinging a massive claw at him. Jarek ducked. The claw missed him by inches, slamming into the ground hard enough to crack the floor. He rolled away and fired again, aiming for the exposed joints at the creature's neck. It howled in pain as the bullets tore into softer flesh, but it didn't go down. Then a rocket struck it square in the chest. The explosion rocked the tunnel, sending a shockwave of heat and debris outward. When the smoke cleared, the shock trooper was nothing but scorched remains. Jarek turned. Cade stood on the catwalk above, a smoking RPG slung over his shoulder. "You're welcome," Cade said dryly. Jarek allowed himself a smirk. "More incoming." As if in response, a second explosion erupted deeper in the tunnels. The Dominion was pressing their attack, trying to force them into a bottleneck. Voss grabbed Jarek's arm. "We can't win a war of attrition. We need an escape route." Jarek exhaled sharply. She was right. If they held out too long, the Dominion would flood the tunnels with more troops, maybe even an orbital strike if they got desperate, and that meant they had to take the fight to the enemy. "Cade, how many charges do we have left?" "Enough." Jarek nodded. "Good. We're not retreating. We're collapsing the tunnels, on them." The plan was brutal, desperate, and exactly what the situation called for. The survivors set demolition charges at key structural points while Jarek and his team held the line. Every second felt like an eternity. The Dominion troops were relentless. They swarmed in waves, their bladed limbs slicing through makeshift defenses, their plasma cannons reducing cover to slag. But the humans fought like demons, their rifles spitting fire, their grenades tearing through Clivax ranks. Jarek fought with cold precision. Every shot counted. Every move was calculated. He had fought these monsters before, and he knew their weaknesses: joint gaps, sensory nodes, the soft tissue beneath the exoskeletal ridges. He moved like a ghost in the chaos, cutting down one enemy after another. "Charges set," Cade's voice finally came through. "We have 2 minutes before this place comes down." Jarek grabbed Voss' shoulder. "Fall back! Get your people to the evacuation tunnels!" Voss hesitated, her eyes flashing with something unreadable. Then she nodded. The survivors began retreating, firing as they went. The Clivax pushed harder, sensing weakness. Jarek stayed until the last possible second. Then he pressed the detonator. The tunnels roared as fire and rock erupted around them. The shockwave hurled Clivax troops backward, burying them under tons of debris. The screams of the dying aliens echoed through the collapsing corridors, swallowed by the avalanche of destruction. Jarek sprinted for the exit as the world caved in behind him. He barely made it through the final gate before the last charge detonated. The blast sent him sprawling, dust and debris pelting his armor. When he looked back, the tunnel was gone. The Dominion forces were entombed, and the last survivors of Epsilon Prime were free. Back aboard Eidolon, the survivors crowded into the ship's lower decks. Many were injured, all were exhausted, but they were alive. Jarek stood on the bridge, staring at the ruined planet below. Lenara Voss stepped up beside him. "So what now?" Jarek didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, let the weight of what they had done settle. Then he turned to her. "Now," he said, "we make them pay." Voss studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. Outside, Eidolon's engines flared, and the warship turned toward the stars. The hunt for vengeance had begun. The Eidolon slipped through the void like a phantom. Its black hull reflected no light, no energy, just a whisper of movement against the backdrop of endless stars. The Clivax Dominion still believed humanity was extinct. They had no reason to watch for ghosts. Jarek Solon intended to teach them otherwise. On the bridge, The air was thick with tension. The gathered crew and newly rescued survivors stood in near silence, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of tactical displays. Epsilon Prime was behind them now. Ahead, their first target loomed, a Dominion supply station orbiting the gas giant Borsis IV. Jarek stood at the central command station, eyes locked on the holographic readout of the Clivax installation. It was a sprawling construct of sleek alien architecture, its gunmetal plating covered in the eerie bioluminescent runes of its creators. A lifeline of the Dominion's war machine, and soon to be nothing but wreckage. "How many ships?" Jarek asked. Cade leaned over the sensor console. 2 Dominion frigates, standard armament, a few fighter wings. Nothing we can't handle if we hit fast. Voss folded her arms. "And if we don't?" Jarek didn't look at her. "Then we're dead." No one argued. They all knew what they had signed up for. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about sending a message. Humanity wasn't just alive. They were coming for blood. Eidolon coasted through the darkness, silent, undetectable. Its stealth systems masked its presence, its engines running on minimal thrust. The crew held their breath as the Dominion station grew larger in the view screen. "Frigates are in a patrol pattern," Lenara murmured. "They're not expecting trouble." Jarek's lips curled into a cold smile. "Let's introduce ourselves." He turned to Cade. "Power up weapons. Prepare for precision strikes." Cade's fingers danced across the controls. "Railguns hot. Plasma lances charged. Missile tubes loaded." Jarek took a deep breath. "Fire." The first shot split the void like the wrath of a dying god. A railgun slug, traveling at near relativistic speeds, punched through the shields of the nearest Dominion frigate and tore straight through its hull. Explosions rippled across the ship's frame as entire decks decompressed. Before the Dominion could react, Eidolon struck again. Plasma lances ignited the blackness, carving through the second frigate's engines. The alien vessel spasmed, listing sideways as fire and debris vomited into space. Then the missiles hit. Brilliant contrails of light spiraled toward the Dominion station, striking key structural points. The installation shuddered under the barrage, its defensive turrets scrambling to respond. Too late. Inside the command center, alarms blared in panicked, chittering Clivax tones. Jarek imagined the station's overseer, some smug Dominion officer, lounging in his control seat, utterly unprepared for the nightmare descending upon him. He allowed himself a grim satisfaction. "Bring us in," he ordered. "Boarding teams, get ready." The Eidolon latched onto the damaged station like a predator sinking its claws into prey. The boarding ramp extended, sealing onto the Dominion airlock. Inside, Jarek and his team stood ready, weapons primed. Lenara Voss was at his side, her pulse rifle humming with lethal energy. Cade checked his pistol, nodding in silent confirmation. Behind them, a mix of Eidolon's crew and Epsilon Prime's survivors tightened their grips on scavenged Dominion weapons. For many, this was their first real battle. For others, it was a chance at revenge. Jarek didn't bother with a speech. Instead, he hit the breach charge. The door blasted inward. "Move!" Jarek shouted. The first wave of Clivax soldiers barely had time to react before they were cut down. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds shredded their carapace armor, splattering alien ichor across the walls. Jarek pressed forward, rifle raised, firing in controlled bursts. He dropped one Clivax warrior with a shot to the sensory node, another with a precise burst to the throat. Lenara was a force of nature beside him, moving with lethal grace, her shots never missing their mark. Cade provided cover from the rear, his pistol sending precise energy blasts into any Dominion soldier who tried to flank them. The halls of the station became a war zone. Clivax reinforcements poured in, screeching in their guttural language. They fought like rabid beasts, claws slashing, plasma weapons roaring. But the humans fought harder. They fought for survival. They fought for vengeance. The battle pushed into the heart of the station, the command center. Jarek kicked open the final door and stepped inside. At the center of the room stood a Clivax officer, its elongated skull encased in ornate battle plating. Its 4 glowing eyes fixed on Jarek, mandibles clicking in a mocking rhythm. "You are an infestation," it hissed. "You will be purged." Jarek leveled his rifle. "Come and try." The officer lunged, faster than any human could react. Jarek barely had time to roll aside as a bladed limb carved through the air where he had stood. Lenara opened fire, her rifle blasting into the creature's armor. The Clivax staggered but didn't fall. With a snarl, it struck her with a backhanded swipe, sending her crashing into a control panel. Jarek took his chance. He surged forward, dodging another strike, and jammed his combat knife straight into the officer's throat. The Clivax screeched in agony. Its limbs spasmed as black ichor sprayed across the floor. Jarek wrenched the blade free and fired his rifle point blank. The officer's head exploded in a flash of burning plasma. The silence that followed was deafening. Lenara groaned, pushing herself up. "Damn. Remind me never to get on your bad side." Jarek exhaled, stepping over the corpse. "Secure the station. Take everything useful. Then we burn it to the ground." Cade's voice crackled over comms. "Captain, you might want to see this." Jarek frowned. "What is it?" "Data logs. Communications from High Command. They mention a name. Supreme Warlord Maltheris Vrax." Jarek's blood ran cold. The Butcher of Earth. Lenara looked at him, expression grim. "You think he knows we're alive?" Jarek's jaw tightened. He will now. The message had been sent. Humanity was back, and Maltheris Vrax would soon learn what it meant to fear. The Eidolon burned through the void, a spectral shadow against the endless night. Jarek Solon stood on the bridge, arms crossed, staring at the swirling mass of data projected in front of him. The stolen Dominion logs lay decrypted, their cold, alien script unraveling into something far more chilling. Orders, fleet movements, and a name that had haunted humanity's dying breath. Supreme Warlord Maltheris Vrax, the architect of Earth's annihilation. Jarek's grip tightened on the edge of the console. This wasn't just another Dominion officer. Vrax was the monster who had orchestrated the slaughter of billions, who had broadcast the fall of humanity's last strongholds as a warning to other species that dared challenge Dominion rule. Now, for the first time, Jarek had a thread to pull, and he intended to pull until it snapped. Lenara Voss leaned against the bulkhead, arms folded. "We just struck a Dominion installation and stole their data. It won't be long before they come looking." Cade flicked through the decrypted logs, brow furrowed. Vrax's fleet was last logged near the Chiron Drift. He glanced up. "That's 5 sectors from here." Jarek's expression was unreadable. "Then that's where we go." Voss narrowed her eyes. "That's suicide, Jarek. That's deep in Dominion space." Jarek turned, his voice even. "We're not going in blind." He tapped a location on the holo display. "There's a refueling station on the fringes of Chiron. If we intercept the right supply convoy, we can slip through undetected." Cade gave a low whistle. "Infiltrating a Dominion fleet? You really want to stare death in the face, huh?" Jarek's gaze was steel. "Number, I want Vrax to know that when he finally dies, it was a human who did it." The Eidolon lurked in the asteroid belt surrounding the Chiron Drift. It was the perfect hunting ground. Twisting rock formations, dense radiation pockets, and enough stellar debris to scramble most long-range sensors. Jarek sat in his command chair, watching the tactical display as a Dominion fuel convoy emerged from subspace. 3 tankers, lightly guarded. Perfect. Engage stealth drive, Jarek ordered. The Eidolon drifted forward like a vengeful wraith. Cade worked the controls. Weapons locked. Ready when you are, Captain. Jarek's fingers tightened around the armrest. Fire. A silent storm erupted. Railgun slugs lanced through the blackness, slamming into the lead escort frigate. Its hull buckled, splitting apart in a silent explosion. Plasma beams carved into the second ship before it could react. Within seconds, the convoy's defenses lay in ruins. Boarding teams, move in! Jarek led the charge. The Dominion tanker's airlock breached with a flash, and his strike team stormed inside. Clivax soldiers scrambled, caught between confusion and panic. Jarek's rifle barked plasma fire, dropping 2 before they could return fire. Lenara swept forward, her combat blade cutting through an alien's throat in one fluid motion. Cade laid down cover fire, forcing the remaining Clivax into retreat. Within minutes, the tanker was secured. Cade pulled up a terminal, hacking into the ship's logs. Got something. This convoy was heading to Vrax's fleet. Jarek stepped closer. Where? Cade's fingers danced across the console. Then he stopped. Captain, you're going to want to see this. The screen flickered, showing something that sent ice through Jarek's veins. Not just a fleet, a shipyard, a Dominion dreadnought under construction. Jarek stared at the schematics, heart pounding. This was bigger than revenge. This was the chance to strike a blow that would shatter the Dominion's grip on the galaxy. Lenara stepped beside him. We destroy that dreadnought, and we cripple them. Jarek exhaled slowly. Then we make sure it never leaves that shipyard. Back on the Eidolon, the mood was tense. The stolen Dominion ship carried fresh supplies, fuel, and most importantly, an access code to the shipyard's outer defenses. But there was one problem. They weren't alone anymore. Cade stared at the sensor readout, his face pale. Dominion patrol just dropped out of subspace. They're sweeping the sector. Jarek moved to his command station. Can they see us? Not yet. Voss's jaw tightened. They will soon. Jarek's mind raced. They had what they needed. But they wouldn't make it to the shipyard if they got caught here. A grim smile crossed his face. Then we give them something else to find. The captured Dominion fuel tanker drifted into open space, its engines flickering. A distress beacon activated, pulsing in Dominion signals. Jarek watched from Eidolon's bridge. Come on, take the bait. The Dominion patrol altered course. They moved in. Jarek's hand hovered over the trigger. Just a little closer. The Dominion ships arrived at the tanker, scanning. Seconds stretched. Then, detonation. The tanker exploded in a blinding inferno. A shockwave rippled through space, ripping the patrol ships apart in an instant. The bridge crew let out a collective exhale. Cade grinned. Hell of a distraction. Jarek sat back. Set course for the shipyard. We finish this. As the Eidolon disappeared into the void, Jarek allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Vrax didn't know it yet, but his empire was already burning. The Eidolon was a ghost among giants. Through the viewport, Jarek Solon watched the Dominion shipyard loom before them. Massive, labyrinthine, and bristling with defenses, it hung in the void like a bloated parasite, cradling the monstrous dreadnought under construction. The tyrant's wake. Even unfinished, the Dominion warship dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. A fortress of blackened alloy, bristling with weapons that could reduce entire fleets to smoldering wreckage. Once completed, it wouldn't just cement Dominion control. It would end the possibility of rebellion. Jarek clenched his jaw. Not if I burn it first. Disguised as the stolen fuel tanker, the Eidolon coasted toward the shipyard under the cover of stolen access codes. The crew held their breath as the Dominion control tower sent a signal. Tanker V-422, transmit authorization and cargo manifest. Cade, fingers dancing across the console, sent back a falsified response. A moment of silence. Then, acknowledged. Proceed to docking bay 14. A ripple of tension released. They were in. Jarek turned to his crew. We get in, we sabotage the dreadnought, and we get out before they know what hit them. He met their eyes, knowing the risks. No second chances. Voss loaded her rifle. Then let's make this count. Docking clamps locked the Eidolon into place. The crew, clad in scavenged Dominion uniforms, stepped onto the shipyard's industrial deck, blending into the chaos of alien workers and automated drones. Jarek's pulse quickened as they weaved through the towering corridors of the shipyard. The air was thick with the acrid scent of fuel and metal. Hulking Clivax overseers barked orders in their guttural tongue, unaware that death walked among them. They moved with precision. Step 1. Locate the dreadnought's core. Cade hacked a terminal, fingers swift. Schematics loaded. Cores in the lower reactor bay, central deck. Jarek nodded. Let's move. The reactor bay was a cavernous expanse, lit by the eerie blue glow of containment fields. Suspended in the center was the dreadnought's primary reactor, a fusion of Dominion biomechanical engineering and raw destructive power. Jarek approached, setting a demolition charge on the stabilizer. We overload the core, and this thing tears itself apart. Cade worked his magic, rerouting security overrides. 30 minutes before meltdown. Then, a voice. Cold, familiar. I must commend you, Solon. Jarek spun, weapon raised. From the shadows, Maltharis Vrax emerged, tall, imposing. His obsidian armor gleamed under the reactor's glow, his piercing, predatory gaze fixed on Jarek with quiet amusement. You came all this way, Vrax mused, only to die here. A dozen Dominion guards stepped from the darkness, weapons trained. They had walked into a trap. Voss's grip tightened on her rifle. Jarek? Jarek's mind raced. Think. Vrax took a step forward. You are tenacious for a dying breed. His voice was laced with condescension. I watched your world burn, Solon. I remember the screams, the last pitiful gasps of your so-called indomitable spirit. Jarek's eyes burned with fury, but his voice was steady. And yet, here I am, standing in your house, tearing down your empire. Vrax chuckled darkly. Bravado will not save you. He raised a clawed hand. Kill them! Blades of plasma hissed to life. Jarek didn't hesitate. Now! Voss was already moving, her rifle barking a hailstorm of plasma fire. Cade dropped to the floor, throwing an electro-disruptor that sent 2 Dominion guards into spasms. Jarek lunged, dodging a swipe from a Clivax soldier before slamming his combat knife into its throat. The battle erupted in chaos. Cade frantically hacked a nearby console. Shutting down security doors, buying us time. Jarek fired 2 shots into an approaching warrior, but Vrax was already there. The Dominion warlord moved with inhuman speed, backhanding Jarek across the deck. Pain exploded through his ribs. Vrax loomed over him. Pathetic. Jarek spat blood, eyes defiant. You talk too much. With a snarl, Vrax raised his blade. Boom! A massive explosion ripped through the reactor chamber. Flames and debris erupted, the shockwave sending Dominion warriors flying. Jarek looked up. Voss had blown the stabilizer early. The reactor was going critical. Vrax staggered, his gaze snapping to the melting containment field. Jarek seized the moment. He tackled Vrax into the fire. The warlord snarled, claws slashing at Jarek's armor, but Jarek twisted, slamming an impact grenade against Vrax's chest. "This is for Earth." He detonated it. A blinding explosion rocked the chamber, flinging Jarek back as Vrax vanished in a firestorm. The dreadnought was dying. The Eidolon's engines roared to life, breaking free from the shipyard as explosions tore through its hull. Dominion defenses scrambled, but they were too late. From the viewport, Jarek watched as the Tyrant's wake, the Dominion's ultimate weapon, detonated in a supernova of fire and wreckage. A slow, satisfied smile crept across his face. Lenara slumped into her seat, exhaling. "Damn! I can't believe we pulled that off." Cade let out a breathless laugh. "Did we, though? Because I was pretty sure we were dead back there." Jarek sat back, staring into the burning remains of the dreadnought. Vrax was dead. But something gnawed at him. Wasn't he? The crew celebrated, but Jarek remained silent, staring into the dark, because deep in his gut, something told him this wasn't over. Vrax had survived worse. And if he had escaped that inferno, Jarek knew one thing. Next time, it wouldn't be a warship they'd be hunting. It would be a ghost. The Eidolon drifted silently through the void, its crew battered but alive. The destruction of the Tyrant's wake had sent shockwaves through the Dominion, but Jarek Solon felt no triumph. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. As the crew tended to their wounds and celebrated their victory, Jarek stood alone on the bridge, staring into the endless expanse of stars. Vrax's final words echoed in his mind, a chilling reminder that the Dominion's reach was far greater than one warlord. "Captain?" Lenara's voice broke the silence. She stepped beside him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "What now?" Jarek didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the stars, where the faint glow of distant systems flickered like embers in the dark. Finally he spoke. "We keep fighting, for Earth, for humanity, for every world the Dominion has crushed." Lenara nodded, her resolve mirroring his. "Then we'll need allies, more ships, more soldiers." Jarek turned to her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Then we'll find them, and we'll make the Dominion regret the day they thought they could erase us." The Eidolon's engines flared, and the warship surged forward, cutting through the darkness like a blade. Behind them, the wreckage of the Tyrant's wake burned, a beacon of defiance in the void. Ahead, the stars awaited. And Jarek Solon, the last captain of the United Earth Fleet, would not rest until humanity's light shone brighter than ever before.